So I wrote this book because the leadership industry, which is this set of activities which includes the seminars and the in-company leadership development programs and the blogs and all of the stuff that goes on around the topic of leadership, is an enormous industry. It has existed for 60, 70, 80 years. It involves a lot of talented, hardworking people, and it is an industry by virtually any reasonable measure has completely failed. Employee engagement is low, trust in leaders is low. Many leaders, according to a study by the Center of Creative Leadership, are ineffective in their jobs. Many leaders are losing their jobs. If you ask companies, the companies themselves will say that their leadership development efforts are not producing the leaders that they need, or as many leaders as they need. And so by the criteria of the companies, are we doing a good job developing leaders? No. By measures of workplace, job satisfaction, employee engagement, trust in leaders? No. Are the leaders themselves doing well? No. And so what Leadership BS was about is an attempt to understand how this industry has failed so completely for so long. And the answers, I think there are many answers, but one answer is that there is oftentimes a discontinuity or a disagreement or a discrepancy between what's good for the individual and his or her own career and what's good for the company in terms of its performance. And that's something that I think many people don't acknowledge. And I think the other problem is that we oftentimes confuse rare cases that are inspirational with what's really going on in the world. And so we confuse what we would like to see and what ought to be with what is. And because we don't pay attention to actually what is going on and the real path to success, we have this kind of, we live in this kind of fictional world in terms of at least the leadership work. Well, I think so to take one example, my friend Robert Chapman, who runs Barry Waymiller, which is a very well-run, interesting conglomerate, and has, I think, a very unusual and very productive and good view, and his employees, I think, are engaged, has written a book on leadership. But it's one of the questions that he doesn't ask, and I can't get him to ask, is not, is this a good thing to do the way you're managing, which, by the way, it is, but how common is it? And if it isn't common, why isn't it? So the analogy I often use is to medicine. In medicine, we know doctors ought to wash their hands, and that's interesting. But what's more interesting is what percentage of doctors do wash their hands, and what are the interventions that could increase the rate of hand washing. In the leadership industry, we know what people ought to do, but we never ask the question of how many of them are doing it. And we seldom ask the question of our interventions that we are talking about, the books, the blogs, the training programs, whatever, increasing the frequency of productive leadership behaviors. And if you never know how well you're doing, it is impossible to get better.